Okay, so we offered $295 with $2,000 in earnest money August 25th as a closing date, but they countered at $305 and $5,000 of earnest money August 10th as the closing date. Okay, but we're countering back at $298 and earnest money. I mean, we'll go up, but maybe not 5. Let's do 3,500, kind of split the difference. And the closing date is fine. Do we leave it? And then what if they want to counter back? Do they then do another counter offer back? No, this one, they counter back. Do you ever feel like counter offers and the counter offer forms can get a little complicated, especially as we have multiple rounds of counter offers? Listen, we got to talk about the right way to do counter offers and some options that you have, because it can get a little convoluted and we want to make sure it stays crystal clear. So we know we have OREC's 3 different forms that deal with our base offer, our seller's counter offer, and our buyer's counter offer. And let's just do this by hand so we can kind of see some of the best practices for how to do offers and counter offers and make sure that we get it right. So let's assume we're starting with our base offer and we're going to offer $295,000, and we're going to put our $2,000 of earnest money down with a closing date of August 25th. All right, so we've got a starting point on at least a few terms. And while it would be great if the seller would just accept our original offer, it's of course not always going down that way. So when the seller wants to counter, oh, but one more thing, don't forget that the buyer is supposed to, of course, sign the end of the offer, but they should also be initialing every page. And remember, the point of the initials is not to say whether I accept it or not. It's just for acknowledgement purposes to say, I've seen this and I agree this is part of the packet that we'll be negotiating. So we'll come back to that in a second. So we submit this to the seller, and the seller then decides, hey, I want to change some terms. Thank you for bringing an offer, but let's negotiate. So that seller's going to grab the seller's counter offer form. And the way this works is to say, look, I know you've submitted this offer, but I'm going to attach this counter offer form. And I do suggest doing that when you submit the counter offer, it's not just the one page, but attach it to the original offer so that everybody's on the same page to recognize that, yeah, we've agreed that we at least know all these pages are part of what we're negotiating and nothing is missing, right? But then the seller wants to use this counteroffer. And how does it work? It says, hey, like you gave me this offer, including perhaps some attachments and supplements, and we're going to modify it and amend it. And so what we do here, of course, is we check the box. And so the first one here is purchase price. And so we say, look, purchase price to be $305,000. And the earnest money, we want to see $5,000 of earnest money. And perhaps the closing date, we want to see something different. So we'll say we want to close earlier, so August 10th, right? And what the seller is going to do from there is, first of all, recognize that paragraph 2 here says, buyer, I accept everything in your original offer except for whatever I've put in this counteroffer form. So I accept everything. And that is true, in fact, for the cooperative compensation supplement as well. If you look at the 2026 version, the seller does not need to sign it. The seller doesn't need to sign anything except for the seller's counteroffer form, right? The only thing on the seller's first counter that they sign is the seller's counteroffer, and they initial everything else. A little caveat for things like the FHA or VA certification clause, that's a little bit different. But outside of that, only sign the seller's counteroffer, but initial every other page. The purposes of the initials aren't to say that I accept this page, but so we can see the initials here from the seller, which we want to see, and that just says, hey, buyer, I've seen this page. It's an acknowledgement only. I've seen it and I agree this is part of what we're negotiating. But me initialing here, even though in my counteroffer I'm changing 3 of these terms, those initials don't mean I've accepted it. It just means I've seen it. And so the seller is going to initial every page and they're going to attach their counteroffer and we're going to send this back to the buyer, right? And the buyer sometimes, maybe they're not okay with that. They want some more negotiation. And so for the buyer, we're then going to grab our buyer's counteroffer to the seller's form as one option. And I say one option because let's look at this and then we'll go into more depth. But so the buyer then wants to come back and say, no, 305, I don't think so, but I'll come up a little bit. Let's do the classic meet in the middle. So we'll say 300, and you know, at earnest money, we'll also kind of split that and say 3,500. And closing date, I'm okay with that. Say, sure, we'll close earlier. And so we don't have to check the box here or do anything. Sometimes what you see is on that buyer's counteroffer back to the seller is someone will go ahead and check the closing date and write whatever the seller put in the closing date box so that they match. But that's not really how this is supposed to work, because we always have to remember to come down and look at paragraph 2. And these counteroffer forms on paragraph 2 say, in this case, just like the seller's one said, hey, buyer, I accept everything in your offer except what I've changed here. On the buyer's counteroffer, what it's saying is, seller, I accept everything that you've changed except what I'm changing again here, right? And so because the seller changed the closing date, and if the buyer's okay with that, we don't need to address it on the buyer's counteroffer. We don't need to repeat it, because if I check the box, I'm kind of saying I've changed something there, and can get a little confusing, more confusing than these counteroffer forms can already be in some cases. And so we can see on here that says, hey, seller, I accept everything in the original offer and your counteroffer except what I've changed here. And in this case, we changed the purchase price and the earnest money. And so what's going to happen there is the buyer's going to initial the seller's counteroffer to again say, I've seen it. And then they're going to take their counteroffer, put it right on top of that full package of documents and send it back and say, seller, here it is. Let me sign here to say that I'm okay with this as my counter to your counteroffer. And then the seller gets to decide what they're going to do. And it can get a little more confusing, because what if we're not done in negotiating? Do we just go back and now do another seller's counteroffer, another one on top of this, and now we've got multiple counteroffers on top of multiple counteroffers stacked up? Let's talk about that, because I think there's a better way. Sometimes you're just 99% sure that you're doing things the right way and you know exactly what the answer is, but you want to have a little backup. And I get that. I mean, I've been in that situation myself plenty of times where I want to make sure that I'm doing the right way, and you just need somebody to ask so that, hey, you got my back? Can you just confirm that I'm thinking about this the right way? If that's something you want in your real estate business, we solved that problem. It's our RPro Access community. You can check the link in the description to get exactly what we're doing, how to sign up, and come be a part of that little bit of confirmation to help you feel comfortable that you're doing things the right way. So let's just talk about the different ways you can actually counter somebody's offer, right? We can write up our original offer here, and we can absolutely and should, I think, on an initial counteroffer, go ahead and use the OREC counteroffer form here. It's what it's designed for, right? But it's not the only way to do a counteroffer, right? A counteroffer is just flipping things on their head a little bit to say, hey, buyer, I know that you offered me, but let me just, instead of that, do an offer to you. And so there's different ways that could happen. One of which is, in fact, of course, to use the seller's counteroffer. One of those is to strike an initial something, right? I could strike out the purchase price, put in a different one, and then we can, initial it and call that a counteroffer. I don't like that. I think that's not a best practice, but is that effectively a counteroffer? Yeah, it is. I've changed something, right? Because until the parties sign the exact same identical version of the contract, we don't really have a contract yet. We just are still negotiating. And so if I change something on here, even by striking and initialing, that's a counteroffer. Another option that I could do is buyer could send an offer and I could just write up an entirely new offer as the seller and send it back. That's a counteroffer. That's me saying, I appreciate your offer, I reject it. Here's a new offer back to you, and we just write up a completely brand new contract. That's another way to do it, right? There's a lot of ways that we could do it. And perhaps we just want to add on some sort of an addendum or supplement. Well, we could take the offer and we could add on the supplement that we want and send that back, and now that's a counteroffer, right? So there's a lot of ways we can do it. A counteroffer is simply a party negotiating back to say, we don't have a full agreement yet, I want to change something. Here's my proposal on that. But let's talk about using the forms. So let's say we have our OREC offer form, and then we have next the seller comes in and submits a new counteroffer. So now we've got an offer with a counteroffer. And then the buyer wants to negotiate a little bit. So the buyer prepares their buyer's counteroffer to seller's counteroffer. And we add that on. And if we go any further, things start to get a little bit confusing, right? Because these forms really are designed for one round of negotiation. So my suggestion to you is, if you need to go beyond this, let's take a pause, right? I don't think that the best practice at this point is for the seller to do a new counteroffer and add that on top of it. This starts to get very complicated and very confusing, and this is where things start to get missed. So my philosophy and my recommendation to you is, if you get to this point, don't do another seller's counteroffer. Instead, we can stop here and say, you know what? So things don't get confusing, because who all needs this contract? Well, title needs it, lenders need it, the brokers, the parties. I mean, there's a lot of people that need this contract. So instead, if we've reached this stage of it, I think we should stop and let's just do a new offer. Let's just write up a clean contract. That's never a problem. In the course of negotiation, if there ever comes a time where we've just got too many moving parts, it's okay to take all the negotiation documents that we've had so far, set them aside, and let's write up a fresh, clean contract that everybody can agree to. And of course, we can absolutely negotiate that verbally. It's just not a contract until everybody's signed, because our statute of fraud says contracts for the sale or exchange of real estate must be in writing in order to be valid. So it's not that we can't negotiate verbally, it's just that until it's in writing and it is signed by both parties at the end, it ain't a contract and it ain't binding. So I want you to just think through these forms, and let's just have a little recap here about how they work. Buyer, you make your offer. Seller, if you want to counter, the cleanest way, most appropriate way is to use the OREC counter offer form. From there, for the buyer to counter back, two options. One of which, sure, is you can use the buyer's counter offer to the seller's counter offer form. Or if you think it's cleaner and easier, then just set this aside and write a clean contract. Both ways work, both ways are appropriate. There's nothing wrong with either way. I kind of like the idea of a fresh, clean contract. The fewer pages, the fewer revisions that we have, I think the less likely we are to run into some confusion or problem later on. So buyer, you can either use the buyer's counteroffer form or a fresh new contract. And if we do use the buyer offers counter form, and now we've got offer, counter, and we need to go more, stop here. Let's put these aside. Let's write up a fresh offer based on where negotiation's at right now, and let's continue on from there. That's going to be your cleanest way to handle it, to keep things from getting too confusing.